The year is 2015. A lone American warship cuts through the turquoise waters of the South China Sea, approaching a cluster of artificial islands that didn't exist just months before. On these man-made fortresses, radar systems track every movement. Missile batteries stand ready. This isn't a scene from a thriller. This is real life. And this single ship, sailing within 12 nautical miles of those islands, is about to ignite a decade-long standoff that brings two superpowers to the brink. Welcome to the story of freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, where every voyage is a statement, every mile sailed is a challenge, and the stakes couldn't be higher. For the past 10 years, American warships have been playing a dangerous game of chess on the high seas. Each move calculated, each operation deliberate. This isn't just about ships sailing through water. This is about power, sovereignty, and the future of international order. This is about whether one nation can redraw the map of the ocean and declare it their own. And this is about whether the United States Navy will stand by and watch it happen. The South China Sea. Just saying those words conjures images of tropical islands, shipping lanes, and beneath the surface, vast reserves of oil and natural gas. But there's something else here. Something that makes this particular stretch of ocean one of the most contested pieces of real estate on planet Earth. Over $5 trillion in trade passes through these waters every year. 5 trillion. That's not a typo. 1/3 of global maritime commerce flows through this sea. For the United States, for China, for the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and dozens of other nations, what happens here matters. What happens here shapes the world. Let's go back to the beginning. To understand why American destroyers and cruisers have been conducting these freedom of navigation operations, or FONOPs as they're called in military circles, we need to understand what China has been building. In 2013, something extraordinary began happening in the Spratly Islands. These weren't much to look at originally, just scattered reefs and rocks poking above the waterline at high tide. But China had other plans. Massive dredging ships appeared, sucking up millions of tons of sand from the seafloor and depositing it onto these reefs. Day by day, week by week, islands began to emerge from the sea. And these weren't just islands. They were military bases. China constructed harbors deep enough for warships. They built runways long enough for fighter jets and bombers. They installed radar arrays that could track aircraft and ships hundreds of miles away. They positioned surface-to-air missiles and anti-ship cruise missiles. By 2015, China had created over 3,000 acres of new land in the South China Sea. They had built 7 major installations on reefs that were previously underwater. And then they made a claim that sent shockwaves through Washington, Tokyo, and capitals across Asia. China declared that these islands, these man-made creations, generated territorial waters extending 12 nautical miles in every direction. And they demanded that foreign military vessels ask permission before entering. The United States faced a choice: accept this new reality and effectively validate China's territorial claims, or push back. The decision was made at the highest levels of government. The U.S. would not recognize these artificial islands as legitimate territory. And to demonstrate that position, American warships would sail within 12 miles of these installations without asking anyone's permission. They would exercise what international law calls freedom of navigation. The message was clear. The United States does not accept your claims. These are international waters, and we will sail wherever international law permits. October 27, 2015. The guided missile destroyer USS Lassen becomes the first American warship to conduct a freedom of navigation operation near the Spratly Islands under this new policy. The ship sails within 12 nautical miles of Subi Reef, one of China's artificial islands. The operation lasts for several hours. The Lassen's crew remains at heightened alert, knowing that Chinese vessels are tracking their every move. This isn't training. This isn't an exercise. This is the real thing. Sailors aboard the Lassen understand that they're making history. They're also acutely aware that things could go wrong. A miscalculation, a misunderstanding, an accident. Any of these could escalate into something far more serious. The Chinese response is swift and furious. Beijing summons the American ambassador. Chinese state media denounces the operation as a provocation. Chinese foreign ministry spokespersons use words like illegal and threatening. Naval vessels from the People's Liberation Army Navy shadow the Lassen, following at close range. Radio communications crackle across the airwaves. Chinese officers demand to know the American ship's intentions. They order the Lassen to leave immediately. The American crew responds professionally, stating they are conducting lawful operations in international waters. The tension is palpable, but the Lassen completes its mission and sails away. The first FONOP is in the books, but this is just the beginning. The United States isn't conducting one operation and calling it done. This is going to be a sustained effort, a pattern, a message sent repeatedly over the next 10 years. In January 2016, the destroyer USS Curtis Wilbur sails near Triton Island in the Paracel Islands, another disputed area where China has built facilities. In May 2016, the USS William P. Lawrence conducts operations near Fiery Cross Reef. The pace continues. Sometimes months pass between operations. Sometimes they occur more frequently, but the pattern is established. The United States will not be deterred. These operations will continue. Put yourself in the shoes of a sailor aboard one of these ships. You're a young sailor. Maybe this is your first deployment. You've trained for combat. You've run drills until you can perform your duties in your sleep. But nothing quite prepares you for the reality of sailing into contested waters where a hostile power has explicitly told you that you're not welcome. You stand your watch, monitoring radar screens, checking weapons systems, maintaining communication equipment. Every blip on the radar gets attention. Every radio transmission gets logged. You're professional. You're trained. But you're also human. And you feel the weight of what you're doing. These operations aren't reckless. They're carefully planned at the highest levels. Intelligence analysts assess the situation. Lawyers from the Judge Advocate General's Corps review the legal basis. Operational planners chart the courses, ensuring the ships sail through the right waters at the right times. Diplomats are consulted. Sometimes they're informed only shortly before an operation begins to maintain operational security. The planning process can take weeks. The actual transit might last only a few hours. But every detail matters. As the years progress, the operations become routine in some ways, but they never become routine in terms of risk. In 2017, the USS Dewey sails near Mischief Reef. In 2018, the USS Higgins and USS Antietam conduct operations in the Paracels. The destroyer USS McCampbell operates near the Paracels in January 2019. The USS Preble sails near Scarborough Shoal. Each operation follows the same basic pattern. An American warship sails through waters that China claims, but that the United States insists are international. Chinese vessels shadow the American ship. Radio communications exchange warnings and assertions of legal rights. And then the American vessel completes its transit and continues on its mission. But something is changing. The Chinese are getting more assertive. Their intercepts are becoming closer, more aggressive. In September 2018, the destroyer USS Decatur is conducting operations in the South China Sea when a Chinese destroyer approaches at high speed. The two vessels come within 45 yards of each other. 45 yards. That's less than half a football field. At sea, with ships displacing thousands of tons moving at significant speeds, that's dangerously close. The Decatur's crew executes emergency maneuvers to avoid collision. The incident makes headlines. It underscores how dangerous these operations have become. The United States Navy has rules of engagement, protocols for when and how sailors can use force to defend themselves and their ships. But the preference is always to avoid confrontation while still accomplishing the mission. American commanders train their crews to remain calm, professional, and disciplined even when Chinese vessels engage in aggressive maneuvers. It's a delicate balance. Show strength, but don't provoke. Stand firm, but don't escalate. Defend your rights, but don't start a war. That balance gets tested repeatedly over these 10 years. Let's talk about the legal framework that underpins all of this. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, is the treaty that governs how nations can use the oceans. It defines territorial waters, exclusive economic zones, and the rights that come with each. Under UNCLOS, a nation's territorial sea extends 12 nautical miles from its coast. Within that zone, the coastal nation has sovereignty, but foreign vessels still have the right of innocent passage. An exclusive economic zone extends 200 nautical miles from the coast. Within that zone, the coastal nation has rights to resources like fish and oil, but it doesn't control navigation. Here's the crucial point. Under international law, artificial islands don't generate the same rights as natural territory. You can't dredge up an island in the middle of the ocean and suddenly claim 12 miles of territorial sea around it. China disagrees. China argues that once these features are built up and occupied, they become territory that generates maritime zones. The United States flatly rejects this interpretation, and the freedom of navigation operations are designed to demonstrate that rejection. In 2016, an international tribunal in The Hague ruled on a case brought by the Philippines against China regarding South China Sea claims. The tribunal's decision was devastating to China's position. It ruled that China's historic claims to the vast majority of the South China Sea had no legal basis. It determined that none of the features in the Spratly Islands were capable of generating an exclusive economic zone. It found that China had violated international law by building on these features. China's response was to ignore the ruling completely. Beijing declared the tribunal had no jurisdiction and the decision was null and void. And China continued building, continued militarizing, and continued asserting its claims. The United States wasn't a party to the tribunal case, but American officials pointed to the ruling as validation of their position. The FONOPs continued. In 2017, operations near the Spratlys increased. The USS Lassen sailed near Triton Island. The USS John S. McCain conducted operations despite having been involved in a fatal collision weeks earlier, highlighting the Navy's commitment to these missions even during a time of crisis and self-examination about maritime safety. Think about what's at stake from China's perspective. For decades, China felt humiliated by foreign powers, carved up by colonial empires, forced to sign unequal treaties. The South China Sea, from Beijing's view, is rightfully Chinese territory, stolen during the century of humiliation and now being reclaimed. Chinese leaders speak of core interests, national sovereignty that cannot be compromised. They see American FONOPs not as legal exercises, but as violations of Chinese sovereignty, as attempts to contain China's rise, to keep China weak and subservient. This isn't just about islands or shipping lanes. This is about whether China can take its place as a great power, respected and secure. From the American perspective, this is about maintaining a rules-based international order that has kept the peace and enabled prosperity for decades. If China can unilaterally change maps, create territory, and enforce claims that lack legal basis, what's to stop other nations from doing the same? What happens to the principle that might doesn't make right? The United States has been the guarantor of freedom of navigation since the end of World War II. American warships have sailed the world's oceans, ensuring that commerce can flow freely, that smaller nations aren't bullied, that international law matters. Backing down in the South China Sea would send a message that the era of American leadership is over. By 2019 and 2020, the pace of FONOPs increases significantly. The Trump administration makes clear that challenging China's maritime claims is a priority. In 2019 alone, the U.S. Navy conducts at least 8 FONOPs in the South China Sea. Destroyers like the USS Preble, USS Spruance, and USS Wayne E. Meyer all conduct transits. The operations aren't limited to destroyers. Cruisers participate. The USS Chancellorsville, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, sails near the Spratlys. These are powerful warships, bristling with weapons, carrying crews of 300 or more. When they sail through contested waters, it's a statement that can't be ignored. The Chinese response evolves as well. Instead of just verbal protests and shadowing, China begins using its Coast Guard and maritime militia. These are ostensibly civilian vessels, fishing boats and patrol craft, but many are operated by military personnel or coordinated by military authorities. They swarm around American warships, creating complicated situations where the U.S. Navy has to navigate through clusters of vessels while avoiding any actions that could be portrayed as aggressive. It's a gray zone tactic, using forces that aren't officially military to create operational challenges without triggering the responses that would come from a military confrontation. In early 2020, even as the COVID-19 pandemic begins spreading across the globe, the FONOPs continue. The USS McCampbell operates near the Paracels in April. The destroyer USS Barry conducts operations in the Spratlys. The message is clear. Pandemic or no pandemic, the United States Navy is still on duty. Still enforcing freedom of navigation, still refusing to accept China's claims. Then in 2021, something shifts. The Biden administration takes office, and there's speculation about whether the approach to China will change. Will FONOPs continue at the same pace? Will there be attempts at de-escalation? The answer comes quickly. Not only will the operations continue, but they'll be reinforced by stronger diplomatic language. Secretary of State Antony Blinken describes China's claims in the South China Sea as unlawful. The Pentagon releases reports detailing Chinese militarization of the artificial islands. And the FONOPs keep happening. The USS John S. McCain, the same destroyer that operated in these waters years earlier, returns to conduct operations near the Spratlys in February 2021. In March, the USS John Paul Jones transits near the Paracels. These operations now have nearly 6 years of precedent behind them. They've become an established part of U.S. naval operations in the Indo-Pacific. Sailors who joined the Navy in 2015 and stayed for a full career have now participated in multiple FONOPs. For this generation of naval personnel, these operations are part of the job, part of what it means to serve in the Pacific Fleet. Let's think about the technology involved in these operations. Modern warships are marvels of engineering. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyers that conduct many of these operations are equipped with the Aegis Combat System, one of the most sophisticated weapons systems ever created. Powerful radar arrays can track hundreds of contacts simultaneously. Computer systems process vast amounts of data in real time. Missiles and vertical launch cells can strike targets in the air, on the surface, or underwater. These ships are designed to fight and win in the most challenging environments. But during a FONOP, the weapons stay silent. The radars track, the crews remain alert, but the goal is to complete the transit peacefully. It's a show of capability and restraint simultaneously. We could fight if necessary, but we choose to operate lawfully and peacefully. That duality defines these operations. Strength and diplomacy sailing side by side. In 2022, the operations continue with familiar rhythm. The destroyer USS Benfold sails near Mischief Reef, one of China's most developed artificial islands, complete with a runway capable of handling military aircraft. The Chinese Foreign Ministry issues the usual protests. Chinese vessels shadow the American ship, and the Benfold completes its mission. In July 2022, the cruiser USS Antietam and destroyer USS Higgins conduct a rare dual-ship transit, two powerful warships sailing together through the contested waters. It's a demonstration of capability, showing that the U.S. can operate multiple vessels in these areas simultaneously. As we move into 2023 and 2024, a decade after those first artificial islands began rising from the sea, the situation has matured into a stable if tense pattern. China has completed its island building. The 7 major installations in the Spratly Islands are fully operational. Radar systems scan the skies and seas. Fighter jets can deploy to these islands on short notice. Anti-ship missiles cover vast areas of ocean. China has effectively created a strategic network of bases that allows it to project power across the South China Sea in ways that were impossible a decade earlier. The United States has responded not just with FONOPs, but with a broader strategy. Alliances have been strengthened. The Quad, comprising the United States, Japan, India, and Australia, has become more active in discussing Indo-Pacific security. AUKUS, a new security partnership between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, focuses on providing Australia with nuclear-powered submarines and other advanced capabilities. These diplomatic and military arrangements are designed to ensure that no single nation can dominate this critical region. But the FONOPs remain the visible, recurring demonstration of American policy. In 2023, the destroyer USS Milius conducts operations in the Spratly Islands. In 2024, multiple operations occur, with destroyers and cruisers transiting through contested areas on a regular basis. The Chinese protests have become almost scripted. American officials respond with equally scripted assertions of rights under international law. To outside observers, it might seem like a pointless ritual, the same actions and reactions playing out over and over. But there's purpose in the repetition. Every operation reinforces the legal principle that these are international waters. Every transit creates precedent. Over time, these operations build a record that supports the American legal position. If the United States were to stop conducting FONOPs, it could be interpreted as accepting China's claims. The silence would speak volumes. So the operations continue, not because anyone expects them to force China to abandon its islands, but because stopping would concede the argument. Consider the human element again. Over the course of a decade, thousands of American sailors have participated in these operations. They've stood watches in contested waters. They've maintained professional demeanor while being shadowed by potentially hostile vessels. They've trusted their training, their equipment, and their fellow crew members. Some have participated in multiple FONOPs over the course of their careers. For these men and women, this is personal. They're not just following orders. They believe in what they're doing. They understand that their presence matters. The risks have never gone away. In 2023, there were multiple close encounters between American and Chinese vessels in the South China Sea and other areas. A Chinese destroyer cut across the bow of the USS Changhoon, forcing the American ship to slow to avoid collision. These incidents remind everyone involved that the potential for accident or miscalculation remains real. All it takes is one mistake, one moment of misjudgment, and ships could collide. Sailors could be injured or killed. An incident could spiral into a crisis. Both nations have established communication protocols designed to prevent such accidents. The United States and China maintain military-to-military dialogue channels, though these are sometimes suspended during periods of particular tension. When they function, these channels allow officers to communicate directly, to clarify intentions, to reduce the chances of misunderstanding. But in the heat of the moment, when ships are maneuvering in close proximity, split-second decisions matter. And not all Chinese vessels involved in these encounters are under direct military command. The maritime militia operates with less centralized control, which can make their actions less predictable. As we approach 2025, the situation in the South China Sea remains unresolved. China shows no signs of abandoning its claims or removing its military installations. The United States shows no signs of stopping FONOPs or accepting China's position. The other claimants, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Brunei, continue to assert their own claims, sometimes with American support, sometimes navigating carefully between Washington and Beijing. The broader question looms: what comes next? Can this situation continue indefinitely, with both sides maintaining their positions, neither backing down, neither willing to compromise? History suggests that frozen conflicts can last for decades. The Korean Peninsula has been divided since 1953. Cyprus has been partitioned since 1974. Perhaps the South China Sea is destined for similar long-term stalemate. But there are dangers in stalemate. Over time, incidents can accumulate. Close calls can multiply. The law of averages suggests that eventually, something will go wrong. A collision might occur. Weapons might be fired, even accidentally. And then both nations would face terrible choices: back down and appear weak, or escalate and risk war. Neither option is attractive, yet neither side seems willing to change course. The American commitment to freedom of navigation extends far beyond the South China Sea. The U.S. Navy conducts FONOPs around the world, challenging what it considers excessive maritime claims by dozens of countries. But nowhere are these operations as frequent, as high-profile, or as dangerous as in the South China Sea. This is where two great powers directly contest fundamental questions about sovereignty, international law, and the future of the regional order. Think about what's been accomplished over this decade of operations. From one perspective, very little has changed. China still occupies and militarizes its artificial islands. China still claims vast areas of the South China Sea. Chinese vessels still confront American ships. From another perspective, everything has changed. The United States has established a clear pattern of challenging Chinese claims. International law has been affirmed through tribunal rulings and consistent practice. Allies and partners have been reassured that America remains committed to the region. The precedent has been set that illegal claims will be contested. For the sailors who've participated in these operations, the experience leaves lasting impressions. They've served at the sharp edge of great power competition. They've performed their duties professionally under conditions of real tension and potential danger. Many feel pride in what they've done. They've stood up for principles that matter. They've demonstrated American resolve. They've helped maintain a rules-based order that benefits all nations, including the United States. Critics of the FONOPs argue that they're unnecessarily provocative, that they increase the risk of conflict without achieving meaningful results. They suggest that diplomatic engagement, negotiation, and compromise would better serve American interests. They point out that the operations haven't convinced China to change its behavior, so what's the point of continuing them and accepting the associated risks? Defenders of the policy respond that some principles cannot be compromised. Freedom of navigation is a bedrock of international law and global commerce. If the United States allows one nation to unilaterally redraw maritime boundaries and enforce illegal claims through military might, the entire system unravels. The FONOPs aren't designed to force immediate Chinese concessions. They're designed to maintain legal principles, support allies, and demonstrate that American power backs American commitments. In this view, stopping the operations would be the real provocation, an admission of retreat and an invitation for further Chinese expansion. The reality probably lies somewhere between these positions. The FONOPs serve important purposes, but they're not a complete strategy. They need to be part of a broader approach that includes diplomacy, economic engagement, alliance management, and military readiness. Used in isolation, FONOPs might become mere gestures, but as part of a comprehensive strategy, they're a valuable tool. As we stand here in 2025, 10 years after the USS Lassen sailed near Subi Reef, it's worth reflecting on what this decade has taught us. It's taught us that great power competition is back. The post-Cold War era of American unipolarity is over. China is a peer competitor with global ambitions and the resources to pursue them. It's taught us that international law matters, but it only matters if nations are willing to enforce it. Words on paper mean nothing without the will to back them up. It's taught us that sailors and ships remain relevant in an age of cyber warfare and space-based weapons. The physical presence of a warship in contested waters sends a message that no tweet or press release can match. It's taught us that deterrence requires persistence. One operation doesn't deter. 100 operations over 10 years start to create an expectation, a pattern that would be costly to break. And it's taught us that there are no easy answers. The South China Sea dispute isn't going to be resolved by a single brilliant negotiation or decisive military action. It's going to be a long-term challenge that requires sustained attention, careful management, and acceptance of risk. Future generations of American sailors will likely continue conducting these operations, sailing through these same waters, upholding these same principles. The men and women who've participated in FONOPs over the past decade deserve recognition. They've performed difficult, sometimes dangerous work far from home. They've maintained professionalism in the face of provocation. They've trusted their training and their leaders. They've served their country with honor. Their service has helped maintain stability in a region critical to American interests and global prosperity. Looking forward, the United States faces strategic choices. Should the pace of FONOPs increase, sending an even stronger message? Should they be supplemented with other forms of pressure on China? Should there be greater efforts at diplomatic resolution, even if that means compromise? These are questions for policymakers, military leaders, and ultimately the American people to consider. What's certain is that the South China Sea will remain a focal point of international attention. Too much is at stake for it to be otherwise. Trade routes, energy resources, strategic position, national pride, all of these factors converge in these waters. The artificial islands aren't going anywhere. The competing claims aren't going to disappear. And the fundamental question of whether might makes right or whether international law prevails remains unresolved. The freedom of navigation operations conducted between 2015 and 2025 represent a sustained effort to answer that question. Through action, not just words, the United States has declared its position. These are international waters. We will sail them. We will not ask permission. We will uphold the law. And we will accept the risks that come with standing on principle. Every sailor who's stood watch during a FONOP has been part of that declaration. Every commander who's given the order to proceed has accepted responsibility for their crew and their mission. Every policymaker who's authorized these operations has weighed the costs and benefits and concluded that this is necessary. History will judge whether they were right. Future generations will live with the consequences of these decisions. But in the moment, on the bridge of a destroyer cutting through the South China Sea with Chinese vessels on the radar and the crew at heightened alert, there's no time for historical reflection. There's only the mission. Navigate safely, maintain sovereignty, complete the transit, return home, and be ready to do it again when ordered. This is the reality of freedom of navigation operations. Not glamorous, not simple, not risk-free, but necessary in the eyes of those who've defended them for a decade. From 2015 to 2025, through calm seas and rough waters, through multiple administrations and shifting geopolitical winds, these operations have continued. They've become part of the fabric of American naval operations in the Pacific. They've shaped careers, influenced policy, and demonstrated resolve. The story of these 10 years is ultimately a story about choices. China chose to build artificial islands and claim vast ocean areas. The United States chose to challenge those claims through persistent naval operations. Both nations chose to accept the risks inherent in this confrontation rather than backing down. Sailors chose to serve knowing they might be sent into harm's way. And all of us, as citizens of nations affected by what happens in the South China Sea, live with the consequences of these choices. As this 10-year chapter closes and a new one begins, the fundamental dynamic remains unchanged. Two great powers competing for influence, testing each other's resolve, navigating the dangerous space between peace and conflict. The ships will continue to sail. The protests will continue to be issued. The tension will remain. And somewhere in the South China Sea, an American warship will cut through the waves, her crew alert, her mission clear, upholding freedom of navigation in waters that may never be truly free of controversy. This has been the story of a decade of tension, persistence, and principle. Thank you for listening.